Okay, I can see that we are live for this Onalytica LinkedIn Live session, and today we are here to talk about the Metaverse, and we have lined up two most special guests. Usually people say very special, so while I'm hosting, I want to make sure that people are most special. That's the level above. We are very lucky to be joined by Jeremy Dalton and Alex Ruhl. To kick off, I'm just going to let them each introduce themselves in their own words. Alex, do you like to go first and just tell us how you got into the Metaverse?
Sure. How did I get into the metaverse? Well, like most people, it all started when a friend of mine said, look at this cool VR headset that I got for Christmas, like about 6 years ago. And I put it on, and the first thing I saw was some kind of like amazing circus act. And I almost like bashed my head on the wall by trying to get out of the way and realizing, oh my God, what is this medium that has kind of tricked my brain into thinking that I'm actually there? Been obsessed with it ever since. And now I am primarily a virtual reality creator, director, work a lot in the B2B sector to kind of bring soft skills training to life. You know, I've worked with Jeremy on several projects where we've kind of brought to life things like racial bias training or managerial training, sales training, all sorts of things. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about the applications of the metaverse in the B2B sector.
Fantastic. Jeremy, same question.
So I got involved in the metaverse back when we were just talking about virtual reality. And this was about a year or so after Palmer Luckey put his DK1 Oculus Rift on Kickstarter. And I tried it, and I thought, wow, this is absolutely an incredible experience. And, you know, there were a load of other technologies at the time, like artificial intelligence, IoT, all still going on, still going strong. But virtual reality was just such a visceral technology for me, and I could see what the potential was for both the business and the consumer world. So I started campaigning in PwC UK at the time to create a dedicated team around this stuff, and I think they eventually got tired of my belly aching, and in 2017 allowed me to start this team. And since then we've gone from strength to strength, and from name to name. We've been through VR, AR to XR, and now the metaverse technologies. And ultimately what we do is help businesses in different industries to really understand the metaverse and its constituent technologies, and also how they can gain value from it.
Okay, so we're in good hands. Everyone here has been here from the start, of course, apart from your host. But I'm only going to be asking the questions, and I suppose we're going to start with maybe the most existential one about this. I know that this is not a question that necessarily has a single definitive answer, but I'd be interested to hear from both of you what you feel are some of the defining traits of the metaverse. What makes, you know, an experience or a space be within it or not? Is it to do with the tech? Is it to do with the experience? I'll go to you, Alex, first.
Oh yeah, this is where the claws come out, and we start to to see the different kind of like paths people are following in terms of defining the metaverse. For me personally, I always think of the defining thing of the metaverse is the fact that it's essentially a spatialized three-dimensional version of the current internet. So a lot of people would say that the metaverse only exists when it is a three-dimensional world where people can socialize and interact with each other in real time. For me personally, though, I think it's more a case of, you know, currently we sit here on apps and scroll all day, and the metaverse is simply when this becomes this and interacting, you know, we are embodying the internet. So whether that be with something like virtual reality technology, which allows you to kind of step into a fully virtual environment, or it's a case of, you know, you're scrolling Instagram and you come across an ad that you really like and you want to see whether that sofa would look good in your home. So you kind of overlay it into your living room. That for me is kind of the defining thing, is kind of like stepping beyond the kind of 2D screen and having some kind of immersive thredimensional way of connecting with the internet. But I'm sure Jeremy's going to give you a way more solid answer to that.
I think I will attempt it anyway. The way I'd look at it, and the simplest way I can consider a metaverse, and I use the article a instead of the metaverse, is it's a form of virtual worlds inhabited by real people in which those people can communicate, interact with one another, and explore those three-dimensional worlds, as you said. Now, the only limitation of that definition, though, is it doesn't cover any sort of experience that is equally immersive but doesn't contain any people in it, but may perhaps give you information as well. So, for example, the B2B virtual reality experiences that we've worked on, Alex, around training, for example, in the soft skills space, you know, there's a reason why the team that I'm in is called the Metaverse Technologies team. It's a way to get away from the metaverse itself and talk about the technologies that are connected to, related to, and in some senses underpin the metaverse, such as virtual reality, augmented reality, and even blockchain and artificial intelligence. All of these things converge together to produce this new way of working, this new way of living, this new way of playing that is three-dimensional in nature and allows us to experience things in a whole new way.
So I want to pick up on the word sort of technology that you used there, because just before we came on, we were talking a little bit about hardware as a concept, and then obviously there's maybe, you know, something like the engines that people might be familiar with from something like gaming, as you kind of alluded to there. Where would you say we're at in each of those in terms of where the technology is at, maybe in hardware terms, and then in a sort of more abstract sense, the engines that need to run?
So if you're thinking about let's start with the hardware, actually, because that's an interesting one. The hardware to have an experience around the metaverse is in very much ways already with us right now, because we've got our laptops, our desktop systems, and we can use those to experience a form of the metaverse. But also with our mobile phones, in fact, you can experience augmented reality activations that allow you to view B2B and B2C products in different ways. So I think the hardware is both there and not there at the same time, because if you go to the next generation of thinking around it, or where we're starting to see things like the headsets come in, they're mainstream available right now, but they're not quite at the level that we would consider mature, because there's still a way to go in terms of comfort, in terms of weight, in terms of fashionability, in terms of support for eyeglasses wearers, etc., etc. But we will get there.
Battery life possibly as well.
What's that?
Battery life as well.
Yes, battery life, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
So Alex, what kind of, you know, staying on the hardware, what kind of, you know, restrictions would you be thinking about in terms of where the hardware is at now? How is that kind of limiting the capacity of people like you to make things, just based on sort of how far the hardware itself has come?
It's a really interesting question, because a lot of people, especially people that would, you know, come at things from a creative first perspective, would say that story's the most important. You know, it's all about the content, baby. That's not really true in the metaverse. You know, technology has to be at the forefront of a lot of the decisions that you make creatively. Take, for example, a project that Jeremy and I worked together on for PwC UK called In My Shoes. It's a piece where you step into the shoes of a colleague that is kind of experiencing unconscious bias in the workplace. Now, we made that project during a time where it wasn't possible. We were in the height of the pandemic. It was impossible to kind of get together and film this as a project, you know, that would be kind of a very simple 360 video, which would allow you to kind of just passively consume this content and therefore be a lot more widely distributable. What we ended up doing was making this in a way that technically pushed the limits of the hardware, because we used a kind of really advanced video technique called volumetric capture, which basically is a fancy way of saying we filmed it in full 3D. And what that did was that changed totally the creative decisions that we made. All of a sudden, you know, you can't have as many scenes because the hardware cannot run, you know, it cannot run that much data. It can't kind of hold that much information. The app size, you know, is a consideration, because if you have something that's too big and too cumbersome and generating too much using too much power on the headset, you're going to overheat the headsets, and therefore it's not as widely distributable. So all of these factors kind of came into play when making decisions about that project. And I think, you know, the end project has gone on to do really amazing things, and we managed to kind of roll it out on the Quest 2, which is probably the most accessible bit of hardware. But realistically, if that piece could have been shown, you know, on a simple headset that played on like a phone, would 10 times more of people been able to see it? Probably. You know, would that have kind of again changed the way that we'd gone about creating it? Definitely. So the hardware is still a limiting factor, and it's mainly due to not only the fact that people can't really, you know, be in it for too long, but also because of the fact that, you know, the kind of content you can create for it is still limited.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we created the desktop equivalent, right? You know, in the sense that with this experience, which is 3-dimensional in nature, can be accessed or experienced through a virtual reality headset. And with that, there are trade-offs to make. So you get greater immersion at the cost of scale. Equally, the desktop version we created gives you greater scale, but at the cost of immersion, because you are not immersed watching this experience, or not as immersed watching it go ahead on a laptop screen while you're in your room in a completely different world. So yeah, there's always a trade-off to be made.
Where do both of you feel that maybe the sort of, if you were saying, you know, what's a company that's developing something right now to watch over the next 18 months, where are your sort of hopes? You know, if you were placing bets on where the technological advancements were going to come from, so that you can maybe make that project, if you were making that project again in 18 months, you could do it the way you really want to. Which kind of companies, what kind of hardware advancements? Is it making it possible to access on desktop? Is it just cheaper, lighter, higher processing power headsets? Where do you guys kind of feel that's maybe going to come from?
So I'm not personally interested in pushing more of what we can do on desktop. I'm more interested in the fight that is going on right now to bring headsets to a place that make them accessible and intuitive to the everyday user. And that's not necessarily only in the consumer world, in the business world as well. Because when we speak to business leaders are people as well, believe it or not. And they experience the same challenges that a lot of everyday consumers do as well, in that they feel sometimes uncomfortable wearing headsets. They feel self-conscious. They don't want to wear headsets in front of other people because they don't know how to use them. They don't feel confident in using controllers or using their hands in 3D space versus the keyboard and mouse that they've been using for decades now. So, you know, we need to improve user experience to such an extent that being able to achieve something on a headset, whether that is providing remote assistance to someone in the field, whether that is being able to communicate with your fellow colleagues, whether that is marketing a product to relevant stakeholder groups, it needs to be able to be done in such a way that people don't need an instruction manual for, because it's just intuitive. Pick it up, put on the headset. I can figure this out. You know, this is what it's all about. So ideally, that's where I want to go. And in terms of the type of organizations that would be pushing this area that I'm talking about, I'm mostly interested in the hardware manufacturers as a result. I'm interested in also, you know, the universities and the research divisions, because they are performing the work that will help us better understand the psychology of people as they, you know, decide to put on the headset, as they use the headsets themselves and the hardware, and that will give us greater insight to achieving those goals I mentioned.
That makes sense. Alex, where is your kind of attention focus? What are you sort of hoping? You know, what would be a breakthrough you'd be looking at in the next, or hoping for in the next 18 months or longer, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a bit of a cliche, but I'm very much eagle-eyed on Apple. I think there's a lot of talk about Apple getting into the AR, VR. We don't know, you know, which way they're going to come at it, but there's a lot of talk about them coming into the hardware arena. That would be really interesting, because currently you've got, you know, Meta leading the way. Basically, their headset is by far the most widely bought, closely followed, I think, by the PSVR, which obviously is not a B2B bit of gear and you need a PS 4 or 5 to run it. So I'm really interested to see what Apple do, because if Apple enter the space, Apple have got a history of, user first design. So I think that would potentially be interesting to see how they come at exactly what Jeremy's talking about. How do they solve that problem for the fact that it's not actually the most intuitive thing in the world to put on a computer on your face and understand how to interact with it? I mean, I've been working in VR for like 6 years now, and every new iteration of something that comes out, I have to relearn. Like, I was literally just doing a podcast in VR yesterday, and I'd never used the app that we were using before. And I was like trying to get on board with the menu system. I couldn't understand how to like navigate me transporting around the room. And I'm a professional like in this industry. So what hope does the average consumer have? So I think, eyes on Apple to see, not only what do they come up with in terms of a user experience, but also introducing that competition that is so kind of needed in the hardware sector. Because apart from Meta and Sony, yeah, you've got HTC and you've got the Pico, which was recently bought by ByteDance, is it? The owner of TikTok. So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with. But currently, there's not enough kind of competition, I don't think, in terms of pushing the hardware beyond what it has been for the last couple of years. And that's not to decry, the advancements. You look back at original VR headsets, they literally cost millions of pounds and they took up a whole room. And that was just a matter of decades ago. So where we are right now is unbelievable.
But I still have painful memories, Alex, and I'm sure you do as well, of lugging tethered headsets that are meant to be connected to a computer, and if you want to take them anywhere, it has to be a laptop. But putting the laptop, the cables, the headset, the tripods, the sensors, all into a military style Pelican case, shipping that, it was about 22, 23 kilos, so right on the edge of check-in luggage, taking that all over the world and setting it up, which took about half an hour, if the room was right. And if the room was wrong, in other words, if you had any shiny surfaces, mirrors, glass, anything like that, you would mess up the tracking and it wouldn't work. And after all of that hassle and all of that time, you could get one person into virtual reality. That was 2016, and so we've come a long way since then in only a few years.
And after you've lugged all that equipment, you can't bring a change of clothes because you've hit your carry-on limit as well. So
I'm all about sacrificing the clothes for technology. Definitely, technology first.
Absolutely. So we sort of covered the hardware a little bit. It seems like we sort of moved seamlessly a little bit into the software question anyway, because it sounds like usability is clearly a concern. Why do you feel that hasn't been addressed? Do you think people have been kind of just head down, getting to the point where it's consumer tech that can exist in a living room and sort of have that ease of at least starting of sort of entering the metaverse easy enough, and then sort of in a wider sense from a software perspective, what are the kind of virtual reality type environments or engines that you think are kind of leading the space at the minute?
So I think from a software perspective, there's been a two-stream approach where a lot of organizations have been trying to tackle the consumer market, which has challenges in terms of scale and having to reach a large number of people, and the marketing associated with that is difficult. And then, of course, there are challenges that are no less hard in the business world, but are equally significant in the sense that in the business world, you need to be able to convince business leaders of their value. You have to look at return on investment, business cases. You have to be able to have a plan to integrate it within an organization. And those are all difficult problems that are still being grappled with. And of course, the use case itself, and this is probably a good point for us to all discuss, but what are the applications of this technology in a B2B context? There are lots of different ideas we all have, but it's at the end of the day up to business leaders to engage with and to approve and encourage their usage so that we can start to introduce them successfully within those organizations.
Here. I would say, the one other thing that kind of comes to mind in terms of the software side, and specifically talking about that B2B context, is that it's really amusing watching the journey someone goes on as they get more and more exposure to VR. So someone that has never used VR before is going to have a totally different kind of experience when they put on the headset and try and engage with software, compared to someone that's done it maybe 10 to 20 times, compared to someone that's done it, 50 to 100 times. And that journey is quite interesting to develop for, because, you have to essentially rebuild the software every time and tailor it to that person. If you're going into a company that has very little resource and they want to be able to outroll like a health and safety training experience in VR, well, that software needs to be, essentially user friendly for someone that's never used it before. So they can literally pick up the headset, start the app, and it's go, it just goes, right? It tells you everything. Whereas someone else that might have like a 5-person team for facilitating a big exhibition, that's a totally different story. That can be a little bit more, you can build that onboarding into the physical world, and then they get into VR, and they can maybe do a bit more complex things because there's someone there to troubleshoot. So yeah, I think it's also a very interesting thing to be thinking about. Who is the end user of this, and where are they going to be on that journey? And therefore, should you be using hand tracking, or should you simply be able to get them in a headset, stare at the word go or start, and then it just is seamless from there?
And we've worked for a few years on various projects around the metaverse space and B2B, and we've both seen the different approaches and the greater maturity that's come from the software developers in this space. So sometimes we will create custom applications, so literally right from scratch, design them, build them, deploy them. There are now opportunities with low code, no code solutions that are kind of like the olden days WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get type web editors, where you can drag and drop things. There's no real complicated code required. Maybe it's about, pulling down a drop down list of actions. When person looks at this avatar, then avatar turns head, avatar plays this audio file, etc., etc. Now, those platforms have constraints around what you can produce and the fidelity of the applications that you can create, but they represent a valid market for B2B to start building stuff that is a little bit more bespoke than the final way of doing things, which is literally just take off-the-shelf software. It was built for this specific purpose. Let's say it was built for public speaking, or it was built for leadership training. And you have no editing abilities on that whatsoever. You just need to license it and put it into your organization and make it work. And so those are the kind of 3 different areas that we're seeing B2B software vendors develop in, and thus by doing that, giving businesses greater optionality when it comes to using virtual reality and wider metaverse type software.
Yes, it sounds like kind of ultimately we sort of, I keep coming at this question from the angle of technology, but the expertise of people like yourselves who kind of know how to implement it and know the right questions to ask is still key. As it is with any new technology, it's only as good as the people you have to operate it and the people who know the right questions to ask. So I wanted to kind of go next to circling around the sort of question of B2B use cases and things like that. When you're starting to sort of, for example, a prospective client approaches you, Alex, and starts saying, I'm interested in sort of building something in a metaverse type environment, something you might recognize as a metaverse use case. What are the questions that you're sort of asking them, or the things you're trying to understand to almost confirm that it's going to be a good use case you can build? That you definitely feel like you've got a live one, you can build something that's going to be a good user experience. It sounds like one is, have you ever done this before? Do the people in your organization, have they ever put a headset on before, or is this the first time? But what are some of the other questions you might be kind of starting to probe in that process?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of alluded to before, the number one thing is, what is the solution that you're hoping, what problem is this going to solve, essentially? Like always in a B2B context it's not really, if someone ever comes to me and says, we want to do something in the metaverse, and then they're just trying to shoehorn an idea in just to kind of be able to use the word metaverse in their branding, I'll say, realistically, we need to reverse engineer what the problem is, and then I can tell you whether or not metaverse technology is going to solve it. So, I definitely have people that come to me with ideas that realistically, given the fact that they want to achieve a massive amount of scale, aka they want thousands of people to kind of be able to go through, and they have one person internally that they plan on putting the whole project on, including the facilitation afterwards, I might say, well, hang on a second, let's look at why and kind of, is this the best use case of something like my mind, obviously goes to VR purely because that's what I primarily work in. But the same with AR as well. Like, could this be achieved in any other way? Or are you just trying to kind of slap the innovative kind of label on it? So the question, once we've gone through that process, and absolutely, yes, this is a metaverse case, AKA it's a project that would benefit and achieve a return on investment by having that next level immersion, by increasing that engagement and that user kind of experience, because of the fact that you're going from just watching something to actually, experience something firsthand. Once we've gone through that process, then again, we start to kind of dig into, okay, well, where is this going to be shown? Are you using this externally with clients, or what is the kind of the primary goal of the piece? Is it going to be shown at an exhibition to 30 people, or is it going to be used internally as like a mindfulness kind of experience, aka it needs to be kind of it needs to be built in a way that someone could maybe just pick up the headset and know how to use it instinctively themselves, rather than having a fully facilitated experience. Also, a big question is this going to be standalone, as in the VR experience or the metaverse experience, whether that's AR, VR, some kind of virtual environment online? Does this need to kind of have all of the information in and be kind of packed to the teeth with everything? Or is it part of a bigger kind of project? Is it part of, for example, training seminars where this is going to be a small part of a bigger project? In which case, again, we look at, well, okay, which part of this is going to be the most powerful and impactful using metaverse technologies? So those are some of the initial kind of high level things. And then when you start to get into the weeds about the creation of it, you're looking about things like, do you want someone to feel like they have agency over something, aka should it be interactive? Do you want someone to actually be able to physically interact with the environment or other kind of people in the space? Or do you want it to be a guided experience, a passive experience where you're kind of, you are directing them essentially through something and just kind of curating that emotional experience for them? So yeah, there's like, we could literally drill down into so many different things, but those are the kind of high level things when someone has.
And then another good high-level question to ask as well is, based on the problem that you're trying to solve, what currently is the status quo solution that you've got in place to solve that problem? And how does that compare to what you're proposing? Whether that is a metaverse environment on a desktop, whether that is a solely accessed virtual reality experience, whether that is an augmented reality experience on your mobile phone, whatever it is, you've got to be able to compare the two. And if you find, based on that analysis, that there doesn't seem to be much benefit of the proposed solution over the status quo, then that's not a very strong case for investing in these new solutions. And that's probably a good example of what's considered, as Alex was talking about, a vanity project, which is just purely to look good, but with little substance to back it up.
Yeah, looking for an excuse to slap the metaverse sticker on your
Absolutely.
marketing. Yeah, it seems like we've sort of touched on training as a sort of common use case, and maybe sort of more immersive sort of exhibition type experiences. What are the other kind of problems you find yourself really successfully solving? Where you sort of run that assessment, Jeremy, you think, okay, the metaverse will take this to the next level. There is genuinely something there. What are the kind of use cases that you're seeing more of, or that you're hoping to kind of hoover up more of in the coming months and years?
So outside of the B2B marketing space, you've also got the recruitment space. So at PwC, for example, we use virtual worlds to engage with the next generation of talent for the firm. And we've got our own platform called Virtual Park. And to date, we've met with over 20,000 students in that environment. And that's been fantastic because it's allowed us to increase our reach, because the other status quo way of doing this, and we haven't abandoned it, is to physically go to universities around the UK, set up a stall, and then chat to students. And there's only so many people that you can free up to go over there. There's only so much time that you can spend setting up or preparing kit, traveling, setting up kit, demobilizing, traveling back, and so on. But with a metaverse, suddenly the ability to scale up that reach, the potential has become tremendous, because students can come to us wherever they are based in the UK, if they simply have an internet connection and a computer. So that gives us recruitment's a fantastic use case. There's also the operational side of things, and we're starting to talk to clients now about the efficiencies or the benefits that you would get from introducing a metaverse environment as a way of everyday working. Now, I'm not talking about doing your Excel and your PowerPoint slides in a virtual world. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, at least not now. But I'm talking about being co-located with your colleagues in a completely virtual environment. And the reason why that's advantageous is because if you think about it, remote working is obviously here to stay, and it's given us fantastic benefits, but it does come with downsides as well. One of those downsides is the decreased ability to connect with people on an emotional level and in a quick fashion. So if I'm seated in an office and I'm sitting next to someone, I can literally just turn my head and ask a question, then and there, done and dusted. If I am working from home, I have to firstly find the person that I want to talk to on chat, message them, are you free to talk? Then wait for them to respond back. Yes, they are. Okay, here's my link to the video conferencing room. Click in there, wait for them to click in there, have the small talk online, chat through the question I want, end call, and then I've got my answer. It's a much more elongated process, and that's for one query. If you need to multiply that across the day by 5 or 10 queries, then you can see how you start to lose a lot of efficiency, some of which could be gained by being co-located in a virtual world. And instead of physically turning your head, or it could be physically if you had a virtual reality headset on, but let's assume you're on desktop screen. It could be just, opening your mic and saying to your colleague who is virtually sitting there with their avatar that you have this question and you're wondering what to do. So those are exciting use cases for me. And there are many more, of course, like training that we've spoken about.
Yeah, and another one I would add is I'm seeing a lot more kind of inquiries to our company about like B2B promotional kind of like experiences. So for example, wedding venues that want to kind of like get the word out about their wedding kind of venues without having to trying to like market for people to come to them. They kind of offer these kind of metaverse experiences where you can virtually visit the venue, and there's someone there who is a specialist in that venue who can, like Jeremy said, kind of can answer all the questions that you would have as if you were there walking through the site, but it's all done virtually, which means that people can get through far more venues. They can ask, they can spend more time kind of like asking those questions and kind of going through, and even like to some level see like personalization of that venue. Oh, actually, I would imagine the flowers might be blue, so there we go, let's change them to blue. Now it's kind of adding that kind of like whole level of a personalized kind of metaverse experience. And then another example is I was approached by a truck company recently. They're like a global manufacturer of like some very specific niche part of a truck. And what happens is they either have to kind of fly customers over to kind of see this kind of part in person, or they send a kind of shoddy video that kind of shows what it does, but it usually is like the precursor to someone coming over, because it's a large investment to make just off of one promotional video. And again, that's an example where, lo and behold, the metaverse, whether that's, on a desktop virtual environment or putting on a VR headset, or even just like AR projecting the truck in a part into your room, all of a sudden, again, I can see it, I can interact with it, I can see it in action, and it's as close to, being there and being kind of, sold that product as you possibly can without, with all of the friction of traveling and expense of that as well. So Yeah, interesting. It seems like it's branching out into lots of different sectors now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if any of you heard a sound, that was people in the office shuddering at the idea of me being able to unmute and ask them questions at any point in time. Yeah.
Pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we all have a colleague we wish couldn't ask us questions, but that's probably me in this office. But I thought that the recruitment was an interesting one that sort of hadn't necessarily occurred. And it sort of takes me on to something that you've both raised, which is the ability to reduce the total amount of travel that is happening in order to facilitate a lot of kind of interactions that people feel are necessary. I think a strongly held sentiment that I've heard a lot over the last 2.5 years is it is better in person sometimes, isn't it? You know, people kind of feel that way about something. And I thought, you know, the idea of being able to show someone around a venue is interesting. It also probably, if you're thinking about hiring the venue to do a 10,000 person event and some of those people will come virtually, it's fantastic if you can experience it virtually first and see what it's like as well. So I'd be interested, you know, how you both feel about the potential for, you know, it to reduce travel and the potential impact of that. Because I think, you know, often new technology sometimes comes with this idea of, oh, well, you know, that's going to take a lot of computational power. That's going to have a lot of environmental impact. I think, you know, what kind of conversations are you having on the other side of that in terms of being able to, you know, for example, rather than sending 2 colleagues to from London to Aberdeen, you know, getting some of those kind of air miles back. What are the kind of conversations you're having, and are clients actively putting that together, or are you sort of still having to remind them almost that this is a way around that problem?
So we always bring in the environmental benefits when you talk about this technology in terms of their ability to sometimes, not in all cases, negate the need to meet face to face. But what I really want to do as a next step is dig into the numbers behind this, because there are negative environmental impacts as a result of engaging with this technology as well. So, you know, if you decide to put on a virtual reality headset and meet and run a workshop with others, as opposed to flying over there face to face, then I would hypothesize that there would be net sustainability benefits to that. Now, in order to support that, I'm currently working with our colleagues in our sustainability and climate change team to build a model to be able to answer that question in a more definitive manner and less anecdotal manner. That research is currently being conducted, and my aim is to be able to provide that as a free online tool for anyone to be able to access and provide their own quick calculations on, so that they can take the net sustainability benefits, put that into their business case for using the metaverse, whether it's for a workshop or some sort of event.
It's interesting to that point, and I'm so curious, Jeremy, to hear the results of that. That will be really interesting, because obviously, like you say, Jack, it is very much at the forefront of a lot of conversations. The fact that, you know, essentially remote access to things like events could have a really positive effect on the environment. I saw something recently about the fact that not only are you, you know, potentially reducing travel, and therefore are you going to achieve that kind of sustainability, but also the fact that, let's say, for example, I think it was like the Travis Scott Fortnite concert, which, yes, isn't a B2B necessarily, but if we take that principle, right, something like, I think it was millions like attended this concert, right, versus quite a similar amount of people that attended over the span of like 4 months in like a multi-state, potentially global tour. Now you think about like the logistics of like an event like that, traveling for 4 months. Not only that, on top of the fact that all of these people are then traveling from various places to go to it, all of a sudden a one-off event in a virtual environment that, yes, is obviously not the same as meeting in person and seeing like music, for example, live in person, but thinking about like all of the logistics of that 4 months, if you can have the same, if not better impact by just getting more people into a virtual space on a one-off event, all of a sudden you start to get this very interesting kind of argument going on for discussion going on about the fact that actually virtual environments not only potentially reduce carbon emissions from people attending, but actually you're probably going to get more people attending in the first place because less people have to kind of like travel and everything. And that as well might interestingly feed into, well, if more people are using headsets, does that then outweigh the benefit of doing it as a virtual event in the first place? That was all over the place, but it kind of excited me thinking about like just the interesting data behind that.
And what are the sort of inputs apart from distance traveled? I suppose it's the scale feels like the other thing. It's just the sheer number of people reach. You can only fly to so many cities. And I know a lot of musicians are an interesting example of as a very kind of transient lifestyle. You're kind of always traveling. You're always moving around. Yeah. No, I hadn't really put that together. Yeah, he must have. Like, how big would the venues have to be, and how many cities would you have to do, and how many months on the road? I think it sounds probably like quite an attractive deal.
And then on the other side,
a deal for consumers. You know, I'm an avid concert goer. You know, £40+ a pop versus maybe lowering costs for consumers is that scale's quite exciting. The economics of it kind of shift quite dramatically.
Exactly. And I was also thinking, as you were speaking, Jack, the other side of things as well. So you've got the sustainability benefits of the air miles flown and things like that, but you've also got on the, let's say, the VR headset side or even the laptop side, the electricity consumed. You've got the carbon emissions generated as a result of the production of that hardware to consider. So we're hoping to put all of this together and then come up with a net result.
Okay, well, we'll all have to watch this space and make sure you all track down Jeremy on social so that as soon as that's out, we're all aware. Because I think Alex, you're not the only one who's really keen to see the results of that. I think we've sort of talked a lot in terms of maybe the sort of marketing element, things like making people aware or sort of how you contact people. But I suppose in practice with a use case like training, you're thinking a bit about how the sort of almost the root economics of a service being delivered is shifted. Music is the same, but if you, for example, deliver unconscious bias training, there's an opportunity there to be present in thousands of rooms. Do you sort of feel like people who deliver services, the types of services that maybe PwC might deliver at scale, sending 10 people on site to a client for months, are you kind of seeing people waking up to that possibility of kind of just fundamentally shifting almost how many places someone can be or how they can scale their impact, and sort of actually really transforming the services economy, which is huge in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that the metaverse itself hasn't necessarily transformed the way services can be provided by us or others. I would say that's largely been a trend that has been on the rise for a while now, on the cards, and accelerated by the pandemic. The metaverse itself has been buoyed by that trend, and we're likely to see the metaverse being used as part of the trend towards remote delivery of these services in the future.
Alex, what are you kind of, aside from those more sort of marketing focused use cases, are you seeing people looking, beyond just sort of try before you buy things like the truck example? Do you kind of foresee more of that, training type use case where there's an actual sort of full service being delivered? And if not, like, what are the sort of barriers to that remaining?
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy probably has a better grasp on that than me. My kind of brain goes instantly to more, I guess, education, which I guess is kind of similar to the training sector. But I think about when I first kind of got into VR, the fact that, and obviously I keep coming back to the VR, and it's not just VR that makes up the metaverse. But when I think about the metaverse, I think kind of some kind of immersive experience virtually is quite important. And I think about the fact that, would I have been a scientist if this technology was around and instead of just reading a textbook, I stepped into, a body and I was being taught about anatomy from inside a body. You know, would I have wanted to be a historian if I could essentially be taught by Julius Caesar himself about the history of Rome? Like, so I think, again, like coming at it from that kind of more maybe big picture creative sense, like I just think there's going to be so many opportunities that we just can't even fathom right now, that penetrate markets such as training, for example, that you know, that really kind of transform the way that is done. My mind just instantly went to the beginning of filmmaking. When cinema first came about, people were just filming theatre productions because it didn't have a language of its own. It was like, oh, wow, we've got this tech to kind of be able to do what we do now, but do it in this way. So let's just do that. And that's where we are right now, right? We are so at the beginning of something that it's like, oh, yeah, we can take what we do now and do it in the metaverse. Whereas in 5 years' time, we're going to be like, that's, you know, you look at cinema now, it's its own thing. It's so distinctive from theatre. It's totally different. They're two distinct mediums. And I feel that way about the metaverse. I feel like we are at the cusp of understanding how things will be done in this metaverse. But the truth is, as kind of soppy as it sounds, the possibilities are endless, because that is the whole nature of a metaverse, is that all of a sudden it removes all of the barriers to everything. The impossible becomes possible. And that is beyond exciting in any context.
Yeah, the human creativity angle, I think, is a really important one, because you know, it doesn't matter how much time we spend thinking about use cases and applications of this technology. There is no doubt that as the technology improves, as we get new generations, cultures, demographics that have access to the technology, that are actively exploring it, that are maybe building solutions on top of it of their own, that are relevant to their local communities, will no doubt see the new inspiring use cases pop up for what this technology could do for humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, you know, you take that film example, you know, and it made me think of what Jeremy was saying earlier about lugging all of that gear. You know, as soon as a camera becomes cheap enough that someone can set up multiple shots, that changes it. It's no longer just front on. I guess the same is true if lots of people have access to the tech to make it. And that's maybe a question that we haven't touched on too much, is kind of, we've talked a lot about the end user's experience in terms of the tech to make it, to sort of create a metaverse experience. Is that an area where you sort of also anticipate advancements? Is there anything that sort of, you know, would hold back someone sitting watching this call with no experience? What would sort of maybe hold them back right now that we might expect not to in the next few years?
So there are so many aspects of the technology that you could dig further into. I mean, you think about the metaverse and the devices that are used to access it, and the software that is used to give you those applications. There's a lot of technology that sits underneath it. There's software development. There are the game engines that we spoke about earlier, user experience design, graphic design, 3D modeling, 3D animation, sound design. Alex, you know, we've been through the narrative script writing side of things as well on various projects. And that's just the software we're talking about. On the hardware side, there's industrial design, there's optics, there's physics, you know, in terms of lightweight waveguides, there's screen technology, there's materials science. And so all of these areas, there's such a widespread amount of knowledge that needs to be taken to the next level to move us a step up in terms of the metaverse. And it's super exciting. And one area that we haven't even spoken about actually is the Web 3.0 side of things, or the cryptocurrency side of things, because they themselves are a world of their own that is very closely connected to the metaverse. And some purists would argue, of course, that the definition of the metaverse can't exist without some element of decentralization enabled by blockchain technology. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but you know, maybe it's enough for another session in itself, perhaps.
Absolutely. I think exactly what Jeremy said. I feel like there's not a single area that won't be impacted, and there'll be so many jobs that we probably couldn't articulate what they are right now, and in 2 years' time there'll be someone whose job is, you know, a steward of the metaverse or something. There's already jobs popping up where you actually work in the metaverse, you know, but there'll be so many kind of like advancements, I believe, over the next 2 to 5 years that will be totally transformational to the space. And in terms of like, you know, some of the, just an example of how rapidly this stuff is transforming. Again, like when I first started making VR, I started with a technology called 360 video, which essentially just allows you to capture a 360 space so that you can, again, feel like you're kind of in a virtual environment and navigate on desktop, you know, unlike the kind of traditional rectangle. And when I started, you had to get 6 individual GoPros and you had to stick it together on a 3D printed rig. And if any one of those cameras accidentally overheated, or you didn't notice that you accidentally didn't press the button right, or the 3D rig was slightly off and one of the cameras was slightly askew, your whole shot was ruined. That's how it was, the most insane process to try and go through to make even the simplest bit of VR. And now,
sounds like you're speaking from a bit of experience there.
Oh yes, they haunt me. But you know, look at us. Well, we're at the place now where you've got these. Yeah, I mean, PwC own this camera where it's like it films in 11K and it's all synced to an iPad where you literally just press one button and it stitches everything together and everything's done for you, and it's the most insane quality. And that's what, in the space of like. Yeah, it's in the space of a few years that happened. Like that camera came out, you know, a good few years ago now. So it's amazing, the transformation. And that's only on the kind of content creation from a live action point of view, you know, kind of capturing reality. And on the game side of things, you've got things like AR filters, which used to be the fact that you literally had to know how to code C# and like had to be like a super technical developer. And now there's all these kind of plugins where you can kind of create your own and publish them straight to Instagram or Snapchat. And it's fascinating. There's so much advancement going on all the time, and there'll be plenty of ways for people to kind of adopt this within their businesses, I'm sure, over the next 12 months.
Yeah, so that sort of takes me nicely onto the sort of maybe the closing section, just talking about. I saw there's a sort of Gartner prediction doing the rounds that they're sort of expecting by 2026 about a quarter of people are going to be spending an hour a day in the metaverse. You know, if you're thinking about kind of what that's going to look like, what, you know, who are those 25% of people going to be? Like, who is most? Which industries do you think are closest to it? Or is there a type of person, a type of job that you think, a type of sort of job function that you think, Jeremy, like that's closest to sort of realizing that hour a day mark?
So I think it will depend on the industry, because although functions are shared by industries, you'll find that different activities are performed in different functions in different industries. The area that I think is probably worth drawing out, I would say anyone that requires hands-on anyone that has practical skills that they need to deliver to an organization. So let's say it could be a field worker operating for a telecommunications company, for example. I think there is no doubt that in the future they will be mandated to perform immersive training because it will be more effective. And from a health and safety perspective, if it's more effective, that means, you know, less injuries, less casualties as a result of any accidents. So I think we'll definitely see, you know, that contingent of workers being introduced here. But just more generally, I think anyone in an organization that needs to go through a learning and development exercise that is related to soft skills or anything where you need to be hands-on, I think they will benefit from this technology.
Yeah, I would add to that as well. Anything where someone's trying to visualize or create something that doesn't exist yet. So, for example, a recent project, I work with a VR artist called Rosie Summers. She is phenomenal, and she essentially designs in VR. So, for example, if a product, product concept was coming out, let's say for a new trainer, she could literally physically design the trainer in 3D, and she could invite collaborators in to kind of like see it, comment on it. Oh, okay, actually that doesn't work. Maybe this needs to go here. And it's the same with like cars, anything where it's like you're creating something, architecture that doesn't exist. I believe that you'll go from flat design to 3D design quite seamlessly with this. So I would imagine that designers, product designers will probably be a huge category of people that will spend, they're probably already spending more than an hour a day, but definitely like going forward, more and more will adopt that. Because I mean, it makes sense, right? You're creating a 3D product. Why on earth would you design that in 2D? It makes no sense.
And this is an example from the consumer world, but in terms of the average daily time spent by users on Roblox, for example, which is a metaverse platform without the Web 3.0 components of crypto and NFTs and all the rest of it. But they spend, the last stat I saw was 2.6 hours a day, being spent by users in that platform. So it's not that the Gartner prediction, I don't think, is unreasonable if we start to think about this as a generational shift and a cultural shift of time spent in the metaverse.
It seems like there's something about that intersection of, it's types of jobs where you actually, there is some kind of physical component, but it's maybe fulfilled at the minute at a desk, because the way to do that remotely and scalably is to sit at a desk, maybe, and video call people, or, use software on a flat computer to kind of design. But those, the experience of working can be made immersive. So we're nearly at time. I want, firstly, obviously, to thank both of our guests very much. And maybe if you could each just let people know where to find you, where to look out for you, other obviously, Alex, than Venice, very soon. Where should people look out for you?
For me,
you go, Alex, you go.
So for me, you can find me across all social media. It's Alex Makes VR. I have a podcast which is specifically aimed at people who are creating this stuff, but there's definitely some episodes where I've had clients off the back of them because they address questions. For example, how do I distribute VR content? What are the best use cases of VR in a business? That kind of thing. So especially focused on the VR side of things, probably, branching out into the metaverse shortly, but that's where you can find me, either on the podcast at Alex Makes VR, on social media.
And physically, you can find me in London these days, although I will soon be based in Austin. So if anyone is in the local area and fancies showing me where I can find a veggie barbecue, that would be very helpful. Otherwise, in the metaverse or on the internet, you can find me at www.jeremydaltonxr.com. And that has all my social media details, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the like. And you can also catch, a summary of my book, Reality Check, as well as some of the projects that I've worked on in the VR, AR, and wider metaverse space.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure people should be following up on both of those to learn more if today's discussion has piqued their interest. It's absolutely piqued mine. And if all these predictions are correct, then maybe we will see each other all soon virtually. In some form. But thanks very much for watching, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thanks all. Bye-bye.